Again, I'm Monica Brady-Myerov. I'm the founder and CEO of Listenwise. Thank you for joining us tonight for Teachers Talk with Beth Bogage. And we're going to talk about what's working with ELs and remote learning. I'm really excited about this topic. And Beth has been teaching ESL in San Diego Community College District in their non-credit program since 2000. So your Beth's instruction is focused mainly on the intermediate and advanced levels. Beth has always strived to effectively integrate technology into her teaching, and she believes that technology tools can provide students with dynamic and innovative ways in which to access and practice the English language. And welcome to everyone here. If you can put into the chat where you're from, what level you're teaching, what grades you're teaching, we'd love to hear it. Also, we'd love to hear your questions as we proceed throughout the webinar. So welcome, Beth, and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you very much, Monica. So as you mentioned, I have been teaching for quite some time for Diego Continuing Education. This is housed with San Diego Community College District, which is the second largest community college district in California. So it's quite large, and we're lucky in that we have continuing education as one branch, and then we have 3 sister community colleges housed within the same district. So that, I think, is an especially unique position to be in, because it's very helpful in terms of making transitions, especially from the advanced ESL continuing ed side to the college credit side. So in continuing education, we have 6 campuses throughout the city of San Diego, just in continuing ed. So these are the free courses, predominantly ESL and job training. Within ESL, we have all levels from pre-literate to advanced ESL with a focus on transition to college, which is what I teach. And our student population is very diverse, both in terms of language background or native country. I think in my class currently, I have about 9 countries represented. And in terms of other aspects as well, for example, age. So in my current class, this semester, I literally have the youngest student is 19 and the oldest is 80 years old.
Wow.
And so it can be quite challenging, but also very interesting. And then in terms of students' educational level or background in their native language, that varies a lot from student to student. We tend to have quite large classes. But it makes for this sort of chaotic but very interesting and rewarding environment in which to teach and learn.
That's great. We have quite an international crowd here tonight on the webinar. We've got David tuning in from Honduras, Philip from Kobe University, believe that's in Japan, and then we've got Connecticut, Baltimore, California. So thanks everyone for joining. First thing I'd like to do too with everyone who's here is understand what is your current teaching environment. So I'm going to launch the first poll, and I want to hear from you whether you're teaching in person, remote, or hybrid. And this just gives us a sense of what you're up against. And it's interesting to see there are a lot of remote. I believe, Beth, you are fully remote, correct?
Yes, we are. And in fact, we know in our district that we will remain remote minimally through June of next year.
Wow, they've already decided that. Well, yeah. We're speaking to the crowd who wants to know how to do this in remote, because 64% of you are remote entirely. So let's dig into that a little bit. Tell me, how have you adjusted your face-to-face instruction and strategies? What are some of the things you've learned work well?
It's been a challenge. We went through a period right after the pandemic hit where we were sort of in this phase of do the best you can remotely. But starting in the fall semester, we have really put in quite an effort from the teaching side to get students prepared for this online learning environment. In our district, we are using the learning management platform, Canvas, which sort of houses all of our content. And so from the teaching perspective, that was a very important thing to learn, and especially important in terms of students who will eventually be transitioning to the college side. That is also the learning management system that is used on the college side. So first, from the teaching perspective, training myself, but then secondly, getting students ready to be better online learners has been a struggle. I think it takes a lot more self-advocacy on the student side to be a good online learner. And I think that in terms of challenges, first, we've really had to help students get adjusted to being the main person that advocates for them. So being able to reach out and communicate with your instructor when you need help, when you're lost, when you need clarification. Some of these things seem intuitive, but are harder to do, I think, in an online setting for some students. And from the teaching perspective, when you're not physically there in the room and sort of have an instant monitoring ability to know, who's with you and who's struggling, that puts a lot of the responsibility on the student to reach out and connect with the instructor.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you plan? Mm-hmm. Do you do some, in planning for that? I imagine you have to think about, what do you want the students to do before they come in, and what do you want them to do while they're in that Zoom room with you, asynchronous versus synchronous?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how you plan for that.
That has been a challenge as well, because I mentioned to you earlier before we began that my class typically meets 15 hours per week, and that's quite a lot of time that we have together to really go through lesson materials and make our way through curriculum. Now, our Canvas or online learning platform time is more 60% to our synchronous Zoom time, which is more about 40%. So literally the time that I have with students is much more limited than what I'm accustomed to. And so what I find is that in planning, I have to be very deliberate and very organized and very clear in the way that I'm laying out content and materials on the online platform. I need to give examples. I need to have a real online presence. And in order to do that, I really rely a lot on video. Recording myself, showing the screen, being able to, walk students through instructions when necessary, especially because some of this is so difficult for some students in terms of technology skills.
Right, I'm sure they all come with a variety of challenges around that. Some maybe even access to technology. That makes me want to launch the next poll I have here, which is talking about what are the challenges in your current remote or hybrid learning environment. So I'm going to launch that and ask you guys to weigh in who are attending, because what you're talking about, Beth, are things that I think everybody's dealing with. Lack of engagement, yes. Technology bandwidth even.
Absolutely.
And all of the above. I know that's always a popular one too, because really, in looking at that list, Beth, what do you see are your biggest challenges?
There is definitely the significant challenge of physical technology and connectability. In Zoom sessions, so we were talking about the synchronous part as well. I think it's so important for students to have a chance to engage with their peers. And so some of that synchronous time I feel is necessary to put them into breakout groups where they can really engage and interact and work on a task together. And sometimes a real barrier there is, for example, the bandwidth, that this one student in the group gets knocked out of Zoom, for example, which is what we use. Or the environment in which students, they may not have a lot of options in terms of where they are physically, where the computer physically is, or how much space there is in their home, and balancing all the other things that are going on in the household at the same time.
Well, let's focus now on a sample lesson. If you could walk us through a specific example of how you use some of these tools with your students, that would be great.
Okay, so let's see. I can share my screen.
Great.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so I don't know why Amazon just came up. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to share with the participants today is just how, as an instructor, I really have enjoyed using Listenwise as sort of the foundation of our thematic units for each week. So I teach at the advanced level, and usually sort of the foundation of the week's lesson centers around a particular article or a particular topic. And some of the handouts or related material that I'll show you relate to this particular Listenwise article, which is Michelle Obama on Becoming. So this is back in 2019. But in this semester, like if I can show you quickly, you can see my screen with the folders.
Yes.
Okay, this is just to show how this particular semester, almost all of my weekly topics were based on Listenwise. And what I was excited to share is how there are so many topics of interest that can form the basis of your practice for the week, including reading and listening and writing, conversation, vocabulary, etc. So one of my favorite lessons was this one on Michelle Obama when she first began going around and talking about her book, Becoming. And as many participants might know, what's so nice about this tool is that students get the authentic listening practice. And that's one of the big positives for me, is that students repeatedly say that, teacher, I understand you. I have no problem understanding you. But as soon as I step out into the real world of English, that's when a lot of the comprehension difficulties arise. And so I'm a firm believer in, especially at the higher levels, in the fact that we need to provide our students exposure with authentic examples of the English language, so that they can get accustomed to different accents, different ways of speaking, and real English speech. So what's so nice here is you always have the summary at the top, and then you can play the article. Students, when they log into their account, have the ability to play the original in terms of speed, and then they can also slow it down, and the transcript rolls below. So if I can just play, maybe, Monica, for a couple seconds.
Yeah, please do. Let's hear a little bit.
Marriage, her struggles with infertility. Michelle Obama is ready to share her story. The former First Lady has written a new memoir called Becoming. In it, she reveals personal details about her marriage, her struggles with infertility, and finding the key to her own happiness. But as the wife of the man who used to be in the White House, part of Michelle Obama's story is entwined with President Trump. All Things Considered host Audie Cornish went to Chicago to talk with Michelle Obama about her book, and I talked to Audie about what she learned.
Okay, so that's sort of the introduction. That was at regular speed. Students can also slow it down as needed. So nice for students to be able to engage in that listening experience, because as I mentioned, they're with me 15 hours a week traditionally in face-to-face, and they hear my voice a lot through our teaching platform. So important for students to be able to engage in authentic listening comprehension. So if I continue on to show you, that became sort of the springboard of our weekly lessons. So I took this is the Michelle Obama reading from Listenwise, and I put it into this handout format, which has lots of words underlined. And so what you can see is my anticipation of what's going to be new for them and what's going to be difficult for them. So each week in my class, our class is very vocabulary centric, and we work a lot with authentic understanding of deeper understanding of vocabulary. And if you take a look at the words and expressions that I pulled out from the article, these are, many of these are academic terms. Others may be words that they know but could have a secondary meaning or be difficult in terms of pronunciation. These are certainly good words and expressions for students to know who are moving on to the college level.
Yeah, let me interrupt and say how
Yeah.
many amazing idioms and expressions are sprinkled throughout here. Out of the gate, tight,
Right.
get swept
Right.
high. Those are such common phrases. Like we as first language speakers, English as being my first language, you just
Right.
take it for granted. There's
Exactly.
another that you understand it, whereas that can really trip up an English learner. And these stories
Right.
have a lot of these opportunities for conversations around these types of
Exactly. There's also, while there's a lot, it being an article coming from NPR, it's very, there's sort of an academic perspective, but at the same time, there's a lot of typical speech patterns that are represented across the articles. And those are things that are important for us to review and to discuss as a class. So moving on, I mean, these are would be some of the materials that we would go through. And so students, can get together, and now they're using the vocabulary, giving examples, trying to understand the words at a deeper level. And then we would move on to discussion about the reading itself. And how much do students understand about what Michelle Obama said? And then ultimately, this sort of inspired students to become very interested in Michelle Obama's book, Becoming. And what I did was took an excerpt from her actual book. This is a really interesting part of Obama's book where she talks about a counselor visit as a high school senior, and how she was really dissuaded and discouraged from reaching for higher goals. And, this brought on a lot of discussion about, have you ever had an experience in which maybe somebody doubted your abilities, or you were discouraged from pursuing something that you wanted to pursue? So this eventually led to our writing assignment, in which students reacted or responded to or showed how they related to one of Michelle Obama's main points in the Listenwise article or in the excerpt, and had to bring that in to their writing.
That's an excellent.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you said this is using a Listenwise example as a primary, it's main focus of your teaching. Are there other times that you use it as a secondary source? And talk about that a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. So the other thing that I found, once students had this Listenwise account with me, in which I would assign them weekly topics. Here is our topic for this week. And they would also then have it eventually in reading, although initially this way, in the listening form. But students started to investigate beyond what I assigned, right? So they really enjoyed engaging in these types of news articles, which traditionally might have been intimidated by. So I can't understand that. It's too much, it's too difficult. But this sort of gave a nice stepping stone for students to do some independent work on their own. And so the second semester that I was using Listenwise, we deviated and we went to a different source for our weekly readings, but I would still assign them a Listenwise every week for additional practice. And so this was more independent, where I would respond with feedback to their responses from the discussion questions, for example. And it was more independent, but I could see that the students, in large part were actually doing the activities.
That's great. One of the participants is asking, how are the keywords that you showed us previously determined in these texts? Is there any corpus comparison?
I don't use a corpus, but sometimes use the academic word list, which is what a lot of us use, my colleagues and I who teach at the advanced levels. Sorry, I'm getting. But it's sort of my, I usually do about 15 to 18 words. Now, additional words always come up through the course of activities and coursework, but these are the expressions that, as a native speaker, my intuition sort of guides what's going to be new for them, and what is this really important for them to understand, either from a speaking perspective or, as is often the case, from a comprehension perspective. So there are so many ways to say the same idea in any language. But I think what often discourages my students, and this is in my experience, is their frustration with feeling like they've done all this studying, and then they turn on the television, they turn on the radio, or they walk outside and they feel that disconnect. And I think a lot of that comes from the comprehension side.
Mm-hmm. Well, I will add too that in the lesson collection on Listenwise, there are vocabulary words pulled out. Some of them they're very similar. Now, the current events don't have that because we are producing them more quickly. So Beth did create that list herself. But to me, it looks very similar to what you'll find in a lesson on Listenwise. So if you've got an account, or if you want to try it for free, and you can get 30 days free of premium, you can see those built out.
And even in for example, here in the Michelle Obama one, the assignment resources. So these are some of the comprehension questions, and, they will often mention some of these, here's to get swept up in, the idiomatic expression, to get swept up in something, which is what Michelle Obama uses that term of speech in her interview. A lot of times some of that vocabulary is reflected even just in the comprehension or discussion questions.
Right. And every single podcast on Listenwise has those elements, so you can look there for that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're nearing the end of our time, Beth, so I wanted to end with any tips you have to offer teachers who are teaching in remote or a hybrid learning context. You've already shared some great ideas. What else?
Thank you. I mentioned sort of before, this seems rather intuitive or maybe simple, but it can be hard to develop an effective online presence. As I mentioned before, I rely a lot on videos. So our learning management system, Canvas, has a way to easily record within the framework, but I've always used other types of screencasting applications like Loom or screencast-o-matic. And I think it really makes a difference when you, whether through video or through other ways, you provide an online presence and students sort of feel you there, even though it's online.
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly so many wonderful online tools, and I think that, you know, a big part, we mentioned a little bit about engagement or lack thereof, but I think one thing that really does inspire engagement is, first of all, choosing topics if you have that ability to do so. I'm lucky to have a fair amount of academic freedom in what I choose to teach, but you know, choosing topics that are relevant, that, you know, I like the current events part of Listenwise because this is sort of bringing the world that surrounds into the online environment. So I think content, you know, making interesting, dynamic content and really providing a variety of activity sources to practice and engage with the language. I can show, if we have time, just a couple of my favorites.
Yeah, show
1
me.
minute.
And then
Okay.
calling them up. We had a question from Roxana about how long does it take you to create those accompanying materials, the writing prompts, the idioms, the word lists?
I mean, that's hard to answer, but, you know, like many teachers, I think if we're not scaled back, we can go on forever in terms of lesson planning. But the nice thing is that, like, what I find in my teaching career is that now that I've been teaching for many years, I sort of have this base of lessons that I can pull from and adapt, and we do a lot of adapting. And I think it's also really helpful when colleagues can share their resources. And I work with a huge number of colleagues that, you know, we have a lot of professional development opportunities and opportunities to share our work. So I know I didn't really answer that question, but it's, you
That's
know,
okay.
it's
Show us basically how
time consuming. Yeah. I was just going to make mention of TED Ed. I mean, I've always loved TED Talks, but TED Ed is, you know, the education version of that. And what's so great about this is that you can find videos that relate to almost any topic. And there are, you know, accompanying materials already made. If you create a free account, you can sign up through your Gmail. And once you choose a video of interest, you can adapt the accompanying activities that have already been created. This was a little video that we did when we were studying plastic in the ocean, and nurdles, like I learned along with the students, nurdles are those little pieces of microplastic that end up everywhere, right? And so they have very, you know, usually pretty short videos. They're all closed caption. There's a watch, a think, and then in with some questions, and then in the dig deeper section, these are all links to related resources. So other TED Talks, photos, videos of, you know, the problem of plastic in the ocean. It's a really nice website to explore if you're interested in providing some video content to enhance your teaching.
All right. Well, so many good things to share, but I think we're going to have to leave it
Yes.
there.